This week on FAS TV, we're back on Shetland to hear how peatland restoration is an important part of rebuilding the natural environment. David Murray and Stephen Johnson are part of the Shetland Peatland Restoration Services after starting to do peatland restoration on their own crofts.
I'm David Murray. I'm originally from North Row. Been in crofting all my life. We started getting into peatland restoration in 2018. Set up a company in 2019. Been working with machinery for many years and thought we would try and take it across and do really completely the opposite of what we were doing before in agriculture contracting. We're now doing peatland restoration, which is completely turned it on its head, really, because we used to be draining the fields and the hills, and now we're trying to create pools like here behind us, create blanket bog in order to keep in carbon. It's all to do with carbon capture.
My name is Stephen Johnson. My father had a croft and I grew up on the croft, and they ended up eventually taking the croft over myself, and my son now works that with me a little as well. The reason I became interested in peatland restoration was my son did some volunteering on a peatland restoration job in Shetland a few years back, where he was planting moss, and that with a local peatland officer, Sue White. And then he came back and explained to me what was going on and what they were doing and what the purpose of it was. And then I saw that being a way that we could improve the hill ground that we have that's in a very poor condition. And one thing led to another, and we applied for it, got accepted. And then we realised that we could actually do the jobs ourselves, and we got involved with David, and my father is also a partner in the company. And then we set up and we started doing the work. And then we're training courses and such like as well.
Accessing areas to complete peatland restoration can be challenging. However, the team have come up with innovative ways to get machinery to the various locations.
Biggest problem with peatlands in Shetland is the wind and water erosion. It's creating a lot of damage, especially on tops of the hills. So this needs to be sorted out by machine, basically. It's the only way you can get it done. We need to make all the hags, reprofile all the hags and make them all green to stop the erosion from happening. Try and alter the water course a little to get it away from the banks where the erosion is happening. The bare peat areas, they need to be covered in seed or brash and stabilised so it stops that erosion from happening. But it's a huge task, major task. It'll take a few years to get it all started. We also need to lift the water table so it creates the blanket bog, like what's here behind us, creating pools, and we plant the pools with sphagnum moss so it helps the bog grow year on year.
Some of the areas are quite easy to get to and some are extremely difficult. You think it's soft ground, but you don't really experience the softness until you're actually really on it with a machine. Numerous trips back and forth with personnel and fuel for the excavators. Those kind of wear the hill down seriously. So we have now come up with a system where we can put down matting that we can actually travel along with tracked ATVs or whatever we need to be able to service the machines with fuel and also supply the main to it. And it's basically a type of recycled plastic matting that we're able to, that can undulate along the contours of the land, and the machines can go over it and minimal damage is caused to that. So we can actually lift that matting and we still have grasses that's still there and still growing and survive it. Whereas if we had nothing, all you'd have would be a black mark where the vehicles would have been accessing it.
The excavators sit on mats that we've developed as well. It's a similar system made out of larger pipes. It's a recycled material from salmon farms, so it's a win-win for everybody. The mats keeps the machines off the vegetation which is already there, so we're not disturbing it. When the job is finished, you don't see any track marks of machines on the land at all. How we work them is we have 3 mats per machine, so we always sit on 2 and move 1. So you're just keeping making a road for yourself every time you move. It seems to work well, and Sue and Nature Scott are delighted with it.
It's enabled us to work in areas that we would not have been able to go near if we hadn't had the matting.
Yeah.
It couldn't have been done.
Behind us here is a typical example of Shetland Hill that we've been restoring in the past few years. What we would do here is all the black areas, the hags, we would be stripping them back and putting a nice slope on them, just about 45 degrees, and laying the turf back on so it's all green, and we'd be also creating pools to encourage sphagnum moss to grow. And this will help create the blanket bog effect that is required in the soft peat hills here in Shetland.
Sue White is Shetland's Peatland Restoration Project Officer, and she's involved in a number of projects which have been funded on the island.
Hills in Shetland are covered in blanket bog. It's quite a restricted type of peatland, and you can see that the eroding hags and gullies and so on. It's very, very typical of Shetland, but it's not actually how you want a peatland to look. So although we're land managers here tend to, you're very used to thinking that's how it should look, all that black and erosion and so on, that's actually not what we want, because your eroded peatland that you can see the other side of the fence and to the far side, the other side of this site, is emitting huge amounts of CO2. So there's something like 23.84 tonnes of CO2 per hectare per year going up into the atmosphere from that eroded peatland. So this is where peatland action comes in, and peatland restoration. The peatland action programme is all about restoring that peatland back to a state where all that CO2 is being locked in. So the funding is all about climate change, basically. But it's an incredibly easy to access funding pot for land managers, because there's peatland action project officers like myself all around Scotland, and we're dealing with the entire process of getting that funding, right from the initial survey of what's going to need to be done, right through to peat depth surveys, peat slide risk assessments, and so on, putting out the SOR, finding the contractors, and project managing. So, for anybody interested, it's a really nice scheme. And at the moment, 100% funding for the capital works as well. And the reason why peatlands can be really good at basically storing carbon is down to sphagnum moss, which is the main constituent in a healthy peatland. And this wee plant is, as it's photosynthesizing, just like any other plant, it's pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. But what's special about this is the rate of decay is very, very slow. So all that CO2 that's getting locked into the plant as carbon is staying there, and that's what's forming the peat. So this is basically what is going to form peat as it gets compressed over the years. And your peat will build up at about 1 millimetre a year. And that's basically all that, carbon is just getting locked in there. So turning all this degraded CO2 emitting peatland into something that's locking in all that CO2 or that carbon, what we've got to do is, there's basically 2 things. We need to look at the hydrology, because at the moment all these erosion gullies and hags are acting as a kind of drainage network, taking the water off the hill. A peatland, the blanket bog, is a rainwater fed system. You want that rainwater to stay in the peatland on the hill. So that's the first thing, we need to sort out the hydrology. And then we need to sort out all that bare peat as well. And the 2 are done sort of side by side. We're using guys and girls with, usually in Shetland we're working with 8 to 10 tonne machines, diggers. Elsewhere sometimes slightly bigger, but we find the peat is quite soft here. So what they're doing is a combination of reprofiling all those eroding edges. So instead of that vertical face of bare peat that you'll see at the moment, which is constantly eroding further, they'll reprofile it to a nice gentle slope, and then recover that with vegetation. And at the same time they're doing that, they're also they're blocking all these erosion gullies and at the base of the hags, so to keep the water on the hill, to keep the water within that peatland. I mean, a healthy bog, a healthy peatland will be something like 95% water. It's meant to be really wet, and that's when it functions the best, when it's really wet. About half the landmass of Shetland is covered in peat. So Blanket bog-wise, we've got something around 66,000 hectares of blanket bog in Shetland, of which somewhere around 3/4 is degraded, so it's emitting that 23.84 tonnes of CO2 per hectare every year. So very roughly, there's about 40,000 odd hectares of peatland restoration that we need to do in Shetland. We basically need to really upscale and be looking at doing somewhere about 2,000 hectares a year if we can meet that target of getting everything restored to meet the Scottish Government target, which is basically to see peatlands all restored by 2045.
Viking Energy Wind Farm, VEWF, is currently constructing a major wind farm on the Shetland mainland, erecting 103 turbines to generate up to 443 megawatts per hour. Why did Viking Energy choose Shetland for their wind farm?
Shetland is statistically the windiest place in the UK, so we're standing here on a day in early August and you can see the wind resources second to none. So yeah, statistically the windiest place in the UK. If you're building onshore wind in the UK, obviously it makes sense to look at locations where the wind resource is at its best. Also, where we're standing at the moment, there's an oil rig decommissioning base. We're standing below a wind turbine here at Luggies now, and Shetland needs to move away from over-dependence on oil and gas and transition to new, clean, green, renewable energy. That is the future for energy on the planet, and Shetland is well placed to develop and diversify the economy based on that world-class resource. Viking itself, 103 onshore wind turbines, each 4.3 megawatts, so it'll be the third biggest UK onshore wind farm by scale and number of turbines, but because of the wind resource we've got here, it'll be the most productive onshore wind farm in the UK. So it'll produce annually enough power to power around 500,000 homes, and it'll save through producing green electricity as opposed to through fossil fuels or other sources. It'll save 500,000 tonnes of CO2 each year. And the carbon payback, so taking into account all the transport, steel, construction work, disturbance, peat, everything else going on the site, carbon payback based on the wind resource and the clean electricity being produced, less than 2 years. Going right back to the early days of designing where the wind farm was going to go, central mainland of Shetland was chosen as the preferred location for that. There's a lot of peatland there, so there are construction challenges on peat. And obviously, when you're building roads, crane pads, everything else, you have to move large volumes of peat potentially. The area in the central mainland of Shetland, when you actually go out into the hills there, very, very heavily eroded peat on much of the site. So around about 2/3 of the site that we're located on is heavily eroded, damaged peat and a net emitter of the stored carbon there. So there's a determination from the early days of drawing the project together that peat restoration would be a central focus of the development and leaving things in better condition than we find them before the construction phase. Yeah, lots of peat hags, lots of erosion down to bare bedrock and a lot of the ridges and so on. A major commitment in developing Viking to actually restore peat and bulk shift material to fill in between the peat hags, get the peat sealed in and get the erosion under control, and actually in the longer term restore large significant areas to active blanket bog again. So certainly we're in phase one at the moment, which is stabilising areas, large areas that are have been heavily eroding in the past. So the wind farm itself, the footprint, the disturbance area, the roads, the crane pads, 96 hectares, and the on-site peat restoration initiatives, 260 hectares. So significantly more obviously than the actual footprint of the wind farm. And over and above that, obviously along the track network as well, there's an awful lot of reinstatement work going on, turf replacement along the verges of the road, and where it's eroding, there's not enough turf to go around in certain areas, so local seed mixes are being used or utilised or going to be utilised to provide reinstatement along the verges and on these restoration areas.
For the peatland restoration work to be carried out on the windmill site, Viking approached David and his team, which has provided them an opportunity to give their local knowledge and expertise on the project.
We got involved with Viking Energy. It was really just a natural progression on from what we were doing. We had experience in peatland restoration through the work we did with Nature Scott, and then we were approached by Viking Energy to see if we would be interested in doing peatland restoration on site for the wind farm. We were quite enthusiastic to do that. We felt we had experience to do the work.
Gives us an opportunity to grow our business.
This area on our left is what Viking Energy has been reinstating, and under phase 2 reinstatement, which we'll be doing, we'll be knitting all this together, facing up the bank here, making it green so it ties into the natural contours of the hill. We'll also create pools here in at the back, which will be designed by SSE. All the works will be carried out to that spec, but all this will be knitted together and just to create the blanket bog effect again.
Some of the larger turfs to the right here, we'll take them and we'll put them in around the sides of pools that we'll create. And like I said, that gully over there, we'll block off that gully to reduce the water flow out course and help raise the level of the water in this area.
Magnus Johnson, Stephen's father, is a local crofter who has sheep and Highland cattle with a small acreage of arable for his own use. He's using virtual fencing collars on the cows to reduce cattle footfall on the restored peatland.
Just a few sheep and a few Highland cattle, which we have some across there, trying out this experiment with their collars on for the no fence thing, which seems to be actually working tremendously well. I saw an advert on the internet for it and I thought, oh, that looks interesting, so I inquired about it and it just kept going, and in the end Nature Scott, they wanted us to put some cattle on the restoration hill, so they supplied the collars for this year, but it's probably worked as well as we'll need to keep them, I think. And that was quite interesting. I just set off a field and put a line on it and put them in, and they actually picked it up fairly quick. But initially they didn't know what it was because there's nothing physical there. They're used with electric fences, but there was only 2 that ever went bolted when they got a shock, like, because they get 3 warnings, 3 levels of warning, sounds, and then they get electric pulse after that. And there was only 2 that ever went straight through, just kept on going. But once they calmed down, I just took them back, shouted them back with a bucket. And the beauty of it is they can come in the way and they don't get a shock. It's only going out. So it really does work. I'm very impressed with it. One of the main things is you can take it like out on a hill anywhere now that they're trained. And if it's, you could put them anywhere, and if it's soft ground or bits you want to keep them away from, you can just ring fence that bit and they won't go through it. One of the cows that's at home, she had her calf, and this day after she calved, it wasn't too nice a day, the calf went through the boundary and lay up among the long grass, but she wouldn't cross. She went backwards and forwards and she got 141 warnings, but still wouldn't cross. And I went in eventually and chased the calf out, but once the calf was a day or 2 old, then she wasn't quite so worried about it. So, but no, it's working well. Well, they're not actually on the restoration site that we've done for the peatland just yet, because it's obvious when you do it that it's all new and you don't want it disturbed till it has a chance to knit together and start growing again on its own. But once that's done, then they should be able to go on it. And we've also planted some seeds and stuff, and you want to give that a chance to grow and not be grazed as soon as it peeps above the ground, or they'll just pull it out. But after that, hopefully they can go all over unless it's a really boggy bit. Okay, well, we're working with this no fence system because, as you can see up here, there's no fences, and out over there is our restoration area. And the only way we could graze that would be to put up fences, which are very expensive. And if there's no fence, potentially they could go out over there and right onto the road. And that involves another fence. So if you come to look at all the expense of fences, this no fence system really would pay for itself. Because it's not like fence posts, it doesn't rot away, it'll still be there. So hopefully it could be the answer, I think.
To find out more about peatland restoration, please visit fas.scot.
Hello, I'm Fiona Burnett from SRUC, and thank you for joining us for this crop update. Weather's always front and central of people's minds during the harvest period, so a little bit of rain here at Bog Hall as we're filming. That's generally very welcome because of course we've had such a dry season. So harvest progressing well, but the earlier drought has slightly constrained yields in those winter wheat and winter barley crops where we had such good early potential. So yields good, but possibly not amazing. Straw yields are good, slightly patchy throughout the country, but where they are good, then thinking about straw chopping and inclusion to make use of that fertility is, a good choice for this year. And clearly the very dry conditions in July have been impactful on potatoes and veg crops as well. So on potatoes, obviously, sizes are much smaller than usual. It's been good news in terms of blight, so the risk is reduced. But just that importance of keeping blight sprays going right to the end of the potato season. The drought, clearly pretty devastating when it comes to vegetable crops, with the added concern now that we have irrigation bans and restrictions coming in. So, for crops like broccoli, that lack of water is absolutely devastating. Going forward for both potatoes and veg, then it's kind of important to start thinking about the soils and the future fields that you're putting them into. So testing for diseases such as clubroot for the brassicas and for PCN where you're planting potatoes going forward. The spring barley crop, the harvest is ongoing at the moment, and again that crop is variable because of the dry conditions. So that's a quick roundup of crops for this week, and thank you for watching this crop update.